Can I have a motion to call to order the work session? Ms. Mamalito, second by Mrs. Weiss. All in favor? 5-0. Can everyone please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for the attendance tonight, everyone. I'm going to hand it right over to Dr. Bossert.
Thank you, Mrs. Freed, and thank you for everyone who's attending. It was a difficult memo that I sent out earlier in the week, and I did encourage people from the district's faculty and staff to come hear what we had to say. So I see many faculty and staff members as well as community members here to help us through our discussion, so thank you for being here. Before we move on to our discussion of the budget, which is the purpose of tonight's workshop, I just wanted to give the board and the community a brief update from the time that I was able to spend in Albany. Each year, the New York State Council of School Superintendents holds what they call their Winter Institute, which is 2 days of workshops and conferences and things like that took place on Saturday and Sunday. And then Monday and Tuesday are spent on lobbying initiatives where we meet with our elected officials, representative from the executive branch, the legislature, and the Senate, to try to talk about what we feel are priorities for our region and needs as districts on Long Island and throughout the state. Earlier this year, the Elwood Board of Education, through the legislative committee efforts, adopted 5 priorities. So when I went there, our priorities were in concert with the county and the state organization, and these are the conversations I had with our locally elected officials. Senator Goron gave us some time, Senator Flanagan gave us some time, a number of assembly persons. The new chair of the Education Committee for New York State is Senator Shelley Meyer. She is located out of Yonkers, but she gave us some time as the new education chair. And really we were able to get a sense of where the thinking is in Albany as the governor prepares his budget. It became very clear that the governor likes to tie new policy into his executive proposal for the budget. He will allow for funds to be allocated in different directions as long as there are associated new laws or regulations adopted with them. So some of the things that the governor is really focusing on are the tax cap and APPR. And obviously those two things dramatically impact what we do here as a school district and school districts do across the state. And the governor has a way of using financial aid as a way to get policy that he's looking for. This is not new, and he is not the first governor to use the budget process to have laws passed. But what did I take away from my conversations with members of the Senate and the Assembly is that the things that the governor is proposing are a done deal. So the governor has said there will not be a budget unless the tax cap legislation is made permanent, and he is not interested in any modifications to the tax cap legislation in the way that it's written. School leaders, community members have been looking for other types of exemptions, things like high-cost special education aid, things like safety improvements that are made to school officials. We were looking for those things to be tax exemptions because we really are limited right now in the amount of revenue we can raise from our community. And whether the community wants to fully support the district or not, they don't have the capacity to do that, as you know, without piercing the cap in a supermajority. So we learned that the tax cap looks definitive, and I understand that some things can change over time, but the governor has postured on the tax cap legislation much the way the president postured on the border wall. Not getting anything unless I get this. And that was the take coming from Albany. So that's not particularly good. The issue of APPR is new legislation to scale back the regulations, the legislation that speaks to how we evaluate our principals and teachers. We were looking for some work to be done at the state level that uses the input from teachers and principals to come up with this, but unfortunately the APPR legislation is being written by politicians. And we don't really see the sense in that. So the ask there was for the work groups that have been formed by state ed. Dr. Toscano is actually a member of the assessment work group. We were asking for time for the work groups to continue to do that work and make focused recommendations? The answer on that was absolutely not. We're voting on APPR as part of the budget process. So the good news there is that the legislation would decouple student assessments, the 3 to 8 assessments, from a teacher's evaluation. The bad news is it's replaced by another assessment. The way the legislation is written now, every district will have to choose what assessment is used to help evaluate teachers. I'm not sure how much that improves either the process or our parents' confidence in what we are doing. We're just switching one test for another. So that I'm not sure is good news either. Then we talked about the use of schools as polling places and trying to tie in the safety aspect of that. And while every elected official professed to be deeply concerned with safety of our schools and doing everything they can to support it, not one wanted to budge on schools being required to serve as polling places. So I didn't get much good traction there either. We talked about, high quality educations, and then the last piece was funding. As you may have read, New York State came up a bit short in their projected revenue that would lead to the budget. So our initial concern was when we received our initial state aid run, which, as Ms. Dunkel will make part of her presentation, included a $34,000 increase to the Elwood School District. $34,000, and that's all. We were then made to fear that that might be reduced. We were told to feel blessed that the state aid runs for schools from the governor's initial budget to his amended budget after the state realized their shortfall hadn't been reduced. So the years where we lobby and ask for, we really need more funding to support our program, the response was, you're lucky you kept what we initially offered. Do I think our Senate and legislature will be successful in perhaps some increase in state aid? Probably. Will they be substantial enough to make up for the shortcomings that we're about to present to the board and community? No. Because please keep in mind, if our state aid increase is increased by 100%, now we have $68,000. We need hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I had a really nice dinner on Sunday night in Albany, but other than that, I really can't profess to being very happy with any of the conversations that took place with elected officials or any of the news that I can come back and share with the community. I don't anticipate a white horse riding in and saving the day with additional aid, nor do I anticipate our priorities being addressed this year. So our priorities will remain our priorities, and we will continue to advocate and continue to lobby until which time such changes are made. But it doesn't look like it's going to be this year's budget cycle. Questions from the board?
So there was a temporary reprieve about coupling assessments with APPR. That's over this year.
Well, the moratorium actually ends next year.
That's what I thought.
So we would have the year to negotiate new terms of the APPR plan with the Teachers Association and with the Administrative Association for the way our teachers and principals would be evaluated. There is, again, that threat that if you fail to successfully negotiate an agreement, you will not receive any increases to your state aid. So once again, finances are being used as the tool to drive regulation and policy and practice.
So they're voting on the fact that it will still be coupled with an assessment, but it'll be an assessment that's mutually agreed upon.
Mutually agreed upon assessment.
Just till grade 8.
For the 3-day assessments, yes.
Okay.
But there also have to be measurements put in place related to student achievement for all other grades. 11th grade English readings, for example, to evaluate all high school teachers, things like that.
And those assessments that we're going to have to pick up, and Maureen, you can jump in on, that's going to be at our cost, correct?
Of course.
So depending upon what
And some of the materials we use, like STAR
STAR.
and that type of testing we already have,
Mhm.
and we feel it provides relevant data that helps us to progress monitor our students. We have no problem with that. But what I'm concerned about is when we profess to our community that the STAR assessments we've been using to monitor progress and inform instruction are now going to be part of a teacher's evaluation. parents who refuse to have their children tested will now refuse the STAR assessment in addition to the state assessment, or instead of the state assessment. And I think that's a realistic concern.
Will that keep us from progressing? I know we talked about at the Boyd level, going from second grade to third grade and converting to the new testing. Is that going to now inhibit us from doing that and remaining at the same?
No, we can use whatever diagnostics we feel help us to inform instruction and monitor student progress. But as far as it relates to evaluating teachers, that will be negotiated.
But there's an additional cost, right? Now that assessment we have to add on, or are we always going to have to add on that cost? No matter
Well,
what?
if we select an additional outside assessment that we're not currently using, yes, it would have an additional cost. And no, we will not receive any additional funding for it.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty discouraging.
No, but we were told to leave happy that the initial aid run was not reduced further as it was
For
for
30,000?
as it was for healthcare, as it was for senior care, as it was for many different lobby groups who were storming the castle. Educators, we kind of had to hide our IDs because we're getting an increase. We're getting a sizable increase, but it's not nearly enough. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, so we're up to our first resident remarks. I can read this little paragraph here. Does anyone plan on coming up for the first resident remark? I'm thinking more people have questions and comments on the other side of the presentation. Okay, so I won't go through that whole spiel, and we'll get right to Mrs. Dunkel with the news of the hour.
Okay, so my first 2 years in Elwood were the budgets that we worked with were a bit different than this year in that our expenses and our revenue were far closer to equal. And last year was actually a very pleasant budget conversation because we were able to introduce additions and modifications to our budget of things that we really felt addressed the needs of the district. We talked about enhancements, and I was very happy to profess these enhancements to the community. And there were some additions to our program, additions to our staff, equipment purchases that we made that really helped improve the programs we offer to our students here in Elwood. Unfortunately, tonight begins a different type of conversation. Ms. Dunkel will take us through all the numbers so we can see to how we got to this point, and then we'll begin to talk about what we have to do about it. But this year, in order to bring forth a budget to the community that is within the tax cap, we're talking about targeted reductions that will need to be made. And the board will be faced with some difficult decisions that they need to make. So the administration will do everything we can to make sure they are fully informed decisions exploring all areas, because what we are trying to do is reduce but not eliminate, maximize efficiencies, and make targeted reductions that will have the least impact on the quality of programs we provide for our students. There are no reductions that we're recommending that we feel good about. The reductions that we'll be talking about are painful, are things we do not want to do, but we do not have an option other than reducing our operating budget in order to present a tax cap budget to the community. And we're happy to answer as many questions as the board has, but please know that tonight's discussion is in generalities, and before the board votes to adopt a budget on April 4th, a more definitive spending plan will be put in place. I know you're all experienced board members, but I'll say out loud for the community present, all the board does is adopt a bottom line for us to then build a budget around. The spending plan can continue to be a work in progress up until we're presenting it to the community to be voted upon. We want to make sure the community knows what modifications will be made to the experiences their children will have. But what we're asking the board to vote upon is that total spending dollar, which we're going to try to get some direct guidance from you today. When we talk about the program, we'll be able to make modifications over the next 4 to 6 weeks, so we can then present it to the community as what they will see in September. Are we clear about the process? Okay, with that, we wish we had brighter, better news, but I think it's important that the board and the community understand the reality of the challenges we face and To begin taking us through it, I call upon our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Ms. Dunkel.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Dr. Bassett said, I wish this portion of the budget presentation had some better news, but it does not. That being said, I'm going to start just by going over the program, the instructional component of the school district budget. This is the three-part component. We have a program, which is our instructional component, the capital program, and the administrative program. The last two board meetings, we went over the capital and administrative, so tonight's focus is on the program component. Program component is the largest portion of the budget. As you saw in the previous slide, it's roughly 75% of our entire budget. This covers all teacher salaries and benefits, all instructional related costs, textbooks, materials and supplies, contractual, professional development, special education program, which includes our BOCES programs, tuitions for out-of-district placements, contractual costs and other related services for our students, and also our transportation expenses. Thus far in the budget this year, all of the budgeted salaries and benefits reflect any retirements that we have received. Year to date, we received one. Our teachers' retirement system, the teachers' retirement system rate had a decrease in the overall rate this year of 1.75% from year to year. The health insurance rate, also, to offset that, had an increase as per New York State. Transportation budget increase is based on projected CPI, and our contractual and supply adjustments is based on our current trend for the past 4 years. Workbook and textbook essentials continue to decrease based on the one-to-one initiative that we're supplying with the Chromebooks for the students. Supplies are also being decreased due to purchasing with EdData, state contracts, and other cooperating bidding laws that we use, and it saves us money overall because it's a cooperative bid, so the vendors submit lower costs to the districts to purchase their items. Initially, budget goals of the 1920 school year is to maintain all programs, K-12, limited to, not limited to, but including continued enhancement of PBS, mental health, sport and student wellness, the Chromebook initiative, Teachers College, continued support for AIS and ENL population, professional development for teachers and support staff, and we also wish to maintain our fiscal health of the district, which helps us with our bond reading when we go out to borrow money. This year we were granted no fiscal stress designation from the comptroller, and our goal is to also maximize the undesignated reserve at 4%, which is the regulatory limit by law, and if possible to continue to fund the reserves.
Noreen, can I ask you to pause 1 second?
Yes.
While you're talking about the district's good financial health, I will share with the board that the comptroller's office spent 6 months evaluating our district, and their report will be forthcoming. It is currently under embargo, so we can't release it publicly. It becomes released from the comptroller's office, but as school officials, we are giving a preview copy, and when I tell you it is glowing, it is a glowing report that we're very anxious to share with the public. So kudos to Ms. Dunkel, Ms. Lachlan, who put a lot of the work into place, and the faculty and staff in the business office for what was a very, very careful inspection of all of our business operations, and is a glowing report coming from the comptroller.
Thank you. Continuing on, the current budget update for 1920. The tax cap calculation was filed on March 1st as per New York State law. We've received the BOCES budget expense estimations for next year, so we'll continue to work on the BOCES budget. As I mentioned earlier, the retirement notifications, we've received one thus far from our professional staff. All the additional staff continues to be updated, and as Dr. Bassett mentioned, we do have challenges ahead. Those challenges being, our current budget presents us with a deficit of roughly $1.4 million. How did we get here? Revenue. We have limited increase this year to our tax, because of the tax cap formula, which includes a small capital exclusion due to our decreased building aid and our reduced debt. Minimal increase to state aid, which was also mentioned, is to be received, and there's also part of the fact that part of the reason we're getting such a small increase in the state aid is because there is a reduction in there in the building aid. And again, that's because of our debt that's falling off for the old capital projects that we had. That reduction is roughly $119,000, and as Dr. Bassett mentioned, our total stated increase is roughly $34,000. Expenditures. Special education, with the addition of some new students and services that we need to provide to our students, which is why we're here, has driven the cost of the budget up by 17% looking forward to next year, which equates to roughly $486,000. Contractual obligations, things like BOCES, district insurance, things related to buildings and grounds. We have contractual obligations that we need to pay for, and we don't typically have control of those costs. TRS and ERS mandated contributions as per the state. Also health, dental, and other medical insurance costs for all of our employees. That increase budget to budget is roughly 5.4%. And transportation is estimated at 2.4% currently based on CPI. We won't have that final number, unfortunately, till May, which is after the budget's actually adopted, hopefully. So, because of the deficit, we have some options, and Dr. Bosworth's going to address them.
Thanks. So, as I indicated earlier, the things that we'll need to look at to achieve filling the budget deficit that we have right now, there are some that I will be candid, we are not painful. There are things that we would like to have done next year that we'll not be able to do. There were some recommendations that came forward from faculty, from building administration, from all areas of governance, of things we really feel would have benefited our district, benefited our students, that do not make our budget proposal. What we're looking at now is everything that we have in place today within the 18-19 school year and what will not be present for 19-20. So it's actually a two-prong approach in that we weren't able to add anything that we had identified as priorities that would be beneficial, and now we have to take things away that we're currently enjoying with our students. So it's not the most enviable position by any stretch of the imagination. So we have to look at the K-12 instructional program. As Ms. Dunkel said, it accounts for 75% of our budget, so when we're looking for savings, it is the area that has to be focused on. Some things are not difficult. When we look at the equipment that we're looking to purchase, yeah, there was some real nice to have things that we would have liked to have added for next year. We will not be able to. So we were able to either reduce the equipment lines, or some things that we had envisioned purchasing will simply not be able to purchase. Every administrator was given the directive of rolling back the material and supply budget by 10%. That's $100,000 savings right there when we priced it out, just by saying we have to do a little more with a little less. Textbook allocations, we were able to reduce that number because of the Chromebook initiative. That's an okay cut. We don't mind reducing that code because we feel it won't impact program because we do have the Chromebooks present. When we look at the special education program, that was the big increase to our budget. The increases to special education costs were the primary driver in our budget deficit. That doesn't mean there's wasteful spending in that area. It means that we have very high-cost, needy students that have enrolled in our district, and those that we have required additional levels of service, additional levels of support, and sometimes tuition to out-of-district placements. So doing what is best for our students has a price associated with it. So it was a sharp increase to our budget. So there are other aspects of the special education program we have to look at for potential reductions that may not have negative impact on our students. So we're looking at the summer program. The summer program is something we've offered over time that has a significant expense associated with it, whereas it might be preferable to tuition our students to some of the programs that happen around us and save the expense of hosting the program here. The services don't change for the children, but the expense to the district has a significant savings. We have to look and evaluate the manner in which support services are which may mean that students are in slightly larger groups for their resource rooms and things like that. In our integrated classroom settings, we may have one section instead of two, or two may have been optimized. We have to look at the way speech services are offered. Perhaps you're not receiving individual service, you're receiving group services, which saves on staffing. So we have to look at everything we can do so that the students continue to receive the services they need, but perhaps in a modified way. Reduction to the HR department. Last year, the board authorized the hiring of a new director of human resources. We're going to have to look at that. We have managed to work efficiently in HR for a number of years without that position in place, and while that individual has been a wonderful addition to the program, to the department, and has really helped maximize our efficiencies, if the budget doesn't give us the flexibility to keep the individual in the position he's in, that's something where the work will have to be delegated to other members of the administrative team, most directly me. Reduction to professional development. We believe heavily in professional development. We believe that supporting our staff, supporting our teachers is essential to their success. We're not looking to eliminate professional development opportunities, but we may need to reduce them. So for some conferences that we identify as priorities where we have been sending large groups of teachers, we may only be able to send one or two teachers who will then turn key that information back to their colleagues. So this is again an example of reduce but don't eliminate. Evaluate class size. One thing that is working to our advantage, it's not necessarily a positive thing, is that we do have declining enrollment. So when we look at maintaining attractive class size, particularly at Harley, trying to keep those small classes in place, there are a number of sections that we feel the students moving up a grade can do so by reducing a section at the grade level that we see from them. And we're looking at some initial projections, and I don't want to get definitive numbers now. Even if we were to reduce 3 total sections, K to 6, we would still have class sizes all below 25, which is really that tipping point when we evaluate what we're doing with our classes. So we're looking at those sections very, very closely and monitoring the enrollment very closely. AP classes and other offerings. We've enjoyed some flexibility at John Glenn High School because we had the financial wherewithal to do it, to run some classes with some very low enrollments. I'm not certain we'll be able to build a master schedule next year with the same flexibility we had this year, where we will have to make decisions about core subjects and what our cap is for running it, splitting it. We'll just have to look at it carefully. Whereas this year, if we had 28 students enroll for a class, that's one class, easy decision. If it's 32 students, that becomes a difficult decision. Are we going to run 2 classes of 16 for a high school elective? Are we going to run 1 class of 32? Are we going to cap the class size at 25 and 7 students will be placed in the study hall? So there are some difficult decisions to be made when we go through that secondary master schedule. We have to review all of our co-curricular offerings. We have a number and a variety of diverse club offerings across the board, beginning now at the elementary schools, moving on to the middle and high school. We want the students to remain to have all the opportunities they are taking advantage of. What we're looking to identify is the co-curricular offerings that the students aren't taking advantage of. Those that are undersubscribed or are no subscription, we would be able to remove from the budget. Athletic offerings, same thing. We love that we're able to offer as many teams that we have at both the middle school and the high school. But there are some programs that are not currently flourishing. So we'll have to look at student interest and to make sure that every team we run is fully subscribed. This is a hard one. So many of the modifications we made to last year's budget that we really felt and feel have been good, solid additions to the services and programs we're able to offer to our students. We have to look at them most closely. The last things added to the budget have to be the things that are first evaluated for potential reduction from the budget, and that's really unfortunate. The board will be faced with the question, when we get to dollars and cents of all of the values associated with the reductions, potential reductions that I just listed, the board may not feel comfortable in making the deficit work just by reducing. So right now, in your current budget, we have $1.25 million in fund balance allocation. What that means is we start every year with a budget deficit of $1.25 million. It's been a goal of this board and boards that precede you to reduce that deficit spending as much as possible when building a budget. And we have been on a great trajectory to do that. That number not so long ago was $3+ million. We have it pared down to $1.25 million. The initial 5-year plan, which is always as good as the pencil you write it in, was to decrease that fund balance allocation by another $250,000 this year. I can't responsibly recommend that because we were reducing fund balance allocation and have to make another $250,000 in reductions to our programs and staff. So I can't recommend that. What I may ask the board to consider at this time in 2 weeks or 4 weeks is increasing fund balance allocation to preserve some of those items that we'll have to review for reduction. But that's something that we will come back to you with a definitive recommendation. We also have to evaluate the reserves we have in place, how we can maximize those reserves to offset funding within our budget. Whenever we can target money that we have in reserves and use it to decrease a budget line, I believe we should. And Ms. Dunkel has identified some areas in which we can do that. And right now we're at the legal maximum, the regulatory maximum of 4% in undesignated fund balance. That's part of the reason why we have a very high Moody's rating. That's why we'll be able to go out to borrow money at a competitive interest rate. It is advisable by the Comptroller's Office and the State Education Department to have a maximized 4% undesignated fund balance. I really don't want to advocate for reducing that, but it is something that is under the purview of Board of Education. So now it's revenue. This is money coming in. It's not enough, but I will have Ms. Dunkel explain the dollars that we do receive.
Thank you, Dr. Vassar. Proposed revenue at this time in the budget. Again, current state aid increase is approximately $34,000. The final aid figure should be received April 1st if the New York State budget passes on time. We're hoping for additional monies, but as Dr. Vassar mentioned, it's not likely. The appropriated ERS reserve, we're looking to appropriate $825,000 from that reserve to the revenue side of the budget for 1920. That reserve, legally, you can only use the amount that you're actually expensing for ERS. So it's, I don't want to say it's a wash, but you can take money out of the reserve to pay for the actual expenses for that particular budget line. Student tuition is anticipated to remain flat, as is our rental revenue. And that's monies that we receive from outside organizations that use our facilities for certain functions. The proposed budget also includes the maximum tax levy limit, which is 2.56%. In order to exceed the cap, law requires a 60% voter approval rating. The dollar value in exceeding the cap, which is not recommended at this time, would equate to roughly $229,000 per every 0.5%. Maximizing the revenue available to the district will help our fiscal stabilization. Again, it's recommended to go to the maximum of 2.56%, which requires a simple majority vote from the community. When a district is approved below the allowable limit, the base for the following year is set at a lower dollar value, not the allowable limit. And that is something that actually occurred in this particular school year for 18-19. Misconception surrounding the tax levy limit is the limit being 2% for all school districts based on news reports and local papers, but all school districts have varying limits based on their own actual calculation. Their actual debt and their capital project expenses changes their exclusion, thus changes their limit. At the next meeting, March 21st, we will have updates regarding this process as well as more definitive numbers based on conversations with administration, Board of Education, and all stakeholders involved. April 1st is the New York City budget deadline. We should receive our final state aid numbers at this time, and as I mentioned, we're hoping for more money, but it's not likely. On April 4th, budget workshop number 4, there'll be a final budget presentation and a budget adoption at that time. And as Dr. Vasa mentioned before, just please keep in mind the board adopts a total budget figure, not the spending plan for the actual budget. Those decisions are made based upon our needs and includes all stakeholders. Any questions?
I just want to share with the board, there was one meeting not included in Ms. Dunkel's slide that is being held for faculty and staff members. Many are present tonight, and I appreciate them being here, but I wanted to give an opportunity for everyone that works within the organization to hear this information. So we called a voluntary meeting, which will take place next Tuesday afternoon in the middle school auditorium. I'm hopeful that many members of our faculty and staff will elect to come, A, because I want them to hear this information, but also because I'm going to open up the forum for dialogue. Because those who are in the classrooms, those who are in the hallways, those who are in our support positions have insights that we're looking forward to hearing. And if people come forward with ideas for either increased revenue or decreased expenses, I am all ears. We are looking for creative solutions to our problem. We are looking to invest in the perspective of all of our stakeholders, and I'm hopeful that that meeting will bring forward some additional ideas for evaluation. In addition, before we make any presentation publicly that would include the reduction of any position, please know that building principals, myself, association leaders will meet with those individuals involved whose positions may be in jeopardy to say, your position may be in jeopardy. And if someone is on that bubble, we want them to have that information as soon as possible so they can explore all options that they have. It is a commitment I make to you and the community that no one would ever find out that they're losing their position at a public meeting on the Board of Education. Oh, it happens in other places.
I know it wouldn't happen here.
So, can I open it up to the board for questions? Ms. Mammalino?
I just wanted to make a statement. So I want to thank everybody for being here. You know, this is not unique to Elwood. Everybody across the state and the island is feeling this crunch, the 2% tax cap. Although, you know, in theory, sounds great, 2% is not 2%. And I'm looking at, you know, expenditures here rising by 17% and 5% and 2.4%, but we're supposed to stay in our 2% calculation, which is not 2%. But I just wanted to thank you for all being here. It shows how much you care about our community and our students, and we will get through this. I have the utmost confidence in our administration. And, you know, as a board, we will continue to lobby for what we need as a community and as a school district. So thank you, and
Ms. Mammalino, thank you for your confidence, and to your point about engaging stakeholders. The letter that I wrote to the board was privy to, was sent to faculty and staff. There will be a very similar letter that goes out to the community, giving them that same sense and encouraging them to come to our future board meetings to be part of the discussion process as well.
I have a quick question about, so the 2.5% is the
Deb, can you just go closer to your mic, please, so
Oh,
that
sorry. Can you
the
hear me?
tape can hear you?
Okay. Can you guys all hear me now?
Better.
Here? Okay. On your proposed revenue slide, the last bullet point, in order to exceed the cap, the law requires 60%, blah, blah, blah. The dollar value in exceeding the cap would equate to $229,689 for every 0.5%. So if we went to, let's say, 3.56%, not saying that we are by any means, but if we did, the additional amount of money that we would add to our budget would be approximately $500,000.
That would be about 460.
Okay.
Yes. That's what I was just saying, you know, to be more.
I'm gonna be it now.
So
Every 1% is worth 460,000.
Okay.
I anticipated the question that you didn't ask, so I will share with you. The reason why it's not recommended is because with now 5 years of the tax cap being in place, trends have been established across our region and the state in that districts that attempt to pierce the cap often fail. The Elwood School District is one of those districts where the attempted pierce was a very small number, but we failed by a very small margin, to achieve that 60% supermajority. But the rate of passage for tax cap exceeding budgets around the state is less than 10%. And we would have to go 2 full percentage points above our projection to, no more than that. We would have to go to nearly 5% to fully fund our program. So that I don't believe is realistic.
Yeah.
And the other piece is the risk that you take on with a failed Pierce is that if you put up a second vote, you could have to make further reductions to a 0% increase to make up for that budget defeat.
I wasn't looking to look to increase the cap. I was just looking for clarity and understanding the calculation, because I think earlier I had done it based off the 2.56%. So I was doing, that's why I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding it correctly.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mrs. Marcus?
I don't know who wants to answer, but I'm going back to deficit. What options do we have in Gloria's presentation? My question is about the professional development when we think about reducing it. When we're looking at the number that professional development costs, included in that number, do we include the cost of substitutes when teachers are away off campus getting professional development?
Substitute covered budget is another line of the budget. So when we factor in the expense of sending teachers to workshop and conferences, yes, we do include the cost of the substitutes, but it's not the same line of the budget. But we did significantly reduce our substitute allocation in line with reducing professional development. The amount we decreased in our substitute allocation was based upon a reduction in the opportunities teachers will have to leave for conferences, and also we can't find subs anyway, so we could overfund that line by $1 million and we can't spend it.
But if we decrease professional development in any way, it would be reflected in the substitution.
100%.
And then one more question with that professional development. I just want to make note that I would like our professional development as a board to be also considered when we talk about reducing professional development. So even though it's not a faculty program, I know that we do have some expense for our own professional
The
development.
board has a budget line for your own professional development, which typically covers your annual attendance at the NISBA conference. If it is the will of the full board for that budget line to be reduced, we will do that. It is not a significant amount of money allocated to the board, but every dollar counts. And if it is the will of the board to make a reduction there, we will make that adjustment on their behalf.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Weiss?
I want to go on that same page. We've come so far with the high school, with the AP classes and the other elective offerings. I know there, in opening up, we also, are providing smaller classes. But specifically, if we can find out what is it what's the class size that gives us a good number as opposed to going over? What is our limit? Is there a limit on the APs? Like, are we allowed, 30 is kind of like the tops? I know there's a good number that we want to have maximum, but is there something that we can push it to still offer that course?
I think the more relevant question, Mrs. Weiss, is when we run the course. Student tallies have come in, student requests have been received, so the high school is well immersed in building the master schedule for next year based upon the allocations we've provided. And the questions that will come from Ms. Brzezinski in the building level is, I have 8 children who have signed for AP statistics because Mr. Bush is not that popular. Shall we run the class with only 8, or do we need to be subscribed to 15? That's a question I anticipate. I also anticipate the question of, we have 32 children subscribed for AP. What do you teach, Garrett?
Chemistry.
AP Capstone. We would expect to see 32 for AP Capstone. Is that one class or 2? Those are the questions I anticipate hearing from the building administration. I'm not sure there's a definitive answer to your question because the way student tallies and the loads work at the high school will often drive that machine. So I'm not ready to give a hard cap or a soft cap to the high school. I would want to evaluate it on a class-by-class basis. I would be more inclined to run AP Physics with 10 children than I would English 11 with 10 children.
Go to big, I was in teachers, so it's great. Okay.
Mr. Dunmere?
I have a couple comments, question or two. Let's start with the easier one. Also, to reiterate Ms. Mamalito's comments, looking at tonight's tonight, majority of you are also residents of our community, so you have a vested interest in what takes place in the school district of our community, and taking time out of your personal lives to come this evening to be informed and to help us through difficult times is always appreciated. So, just to echo her sentiments, I think we can speak for the board on that. We definitely appreciate it. Second, just because it's fresh in my mind, Ms. Marcus, I agree with you. I think as far as the board making concessions, I think it starts from the top. And I think it makes sense that we do so. So I understand your concern and I echo it. I do want to throw out a concern. I know you're looking at me like, what's the concern? We should do that.
Throw it out.
If we weren't to have that line item in the budget, are we going to be expected as board members? And I'm personally okay with that, to absorb the costs associated with our professional development going possibly to NISBA. Of course, I don't want to set a precedent saying that we're okay funding it personally, but if you want to run for the school board and be on at this side of the dais, you have to be able to afford to do so. I think.
Mr. Tomio, may I make a suggestion for the board's consideration?
Yeah.
I think you heard me say several times during the presentation, one of our goals was to reduce but not eliminate. We've reduced a number of budget codes, and I would suggest to the board, for your own conference attendance and professional development, we reduce but not eliminate that cost. And rather than all 5 board members attending the convention next year that you have the last 2, which has been wonderful, the board appoint a member or 2 to attend and then bring that information back, much the way we will ask our faculty to. So if the board is looking for a recommendation about your own code, I would say reduce but not eliminate.
I nominate Ms. Mulvey. Thank you.
It is in Rochester this year.
And
Just saying.
And last but not least, one for Ms. Dunkel, because how do I not, right? And you may not have the answer, you may have the answer. Just going through a forecast, I think this year we're going to get through our budget. I think we'll sharpen our pencils. I think we'll make the concessions that are needed. I think we'll figure it out. I think the community will get behind what they want, because at the end of the day, we're here to educate the children and improve the taxpayers. I think we will put forward the budget that will do so. Just a question when you were speaking about the capital exclusions. As we go forward with the bond, as we take on the bond debt, are we going forward next year, the year after, as we take on that debt, are we going to assume that the decrease in building aid and the debts that fall off, that we're going to kind of replenish that and we're going to get more increases? So
Yes.
forecasting forward, at least for that section of our budget, kind of...
Yes, with both the bond borrowing, whether it's this coming year or the following year, and the EPC being introduced and going out for the borrowing for that, capital exclusion will go up because we will have a lot more in expenses, but we'll also be receiving our aid at that point, so the capital exclusion will go up.
Thank you.
So that formula changes based upon your debt. Right now, our debt is low because we haven't gone out for our projects yet. Once we go out for our projects, that will be to our advantage.
Yes, once the projects are actually being worked upon, the expenses are being sent, the expenses are being paid, and we start to receive our aid. So they offset one another, but that's what the capital exclusion essentially is made up of, that formula. It's your debt versus the expenses.
Any other questions, Mrs. Marcus?
When the healthcare costs go up, so when the insurance costs go up, I think it was like a 5% increase.
Yes, overall for all the different types of insurance, like medical, dental, things like that, yes.
So if somebody opts out of that, and they're getting the payment versus the coverage, does that number escalate too by 5%? Because the
No,
package?
I don't want to misspeak, but most of the bargaining units, I'm still reacclimating myself to them, most of them have a flat dollar amount for opting out, so those do not change.
So that's not going to flux. All right. And then I have two more questions on the deficit. What options do we have page? Is the summer program for K through 12 special education state required? So we would have to either provide it or farm it out?
No. Our students have individual education plans, and some of them call for a 12-month program. So if the CSE has decided that the student's needs require an regression over the summer is trying to be avoided, the IEP will call for a 12-month program. The largest majority of our students do not have 12-month programs. I believe the number of students who attended the summer program last year through special education was 12. About 12 students.
So we only offer it to students who have a 12-month IEP.
The special education program was only offered to students within
And then when we're talking about evaluate class sizes, and you mentioned that we're going to maintain K through 6 all below 25, is that an actual classroom number, or are we doing an average with some smaller?
There are some variations this year in 5th grade where some class sections are 23, 24, and others are 26. So I am speaking about grade level averages.
And that would be all below, at or below 25 at the entrance of the school year?
With today's projection.
Okay.
So it's up to me. So it looks like we got here from a tax cap formulation that had a little bit of low debt, so some state aid was very minimal. We had increases in our health insurance, we had increases in transportation, contractual things with BOCES. The biggest thing here, and I think anybody who's looking at the slide presentation, is a 17% increase in special education costs. Can you speak a little bit to that? We always have increased special education costs. Where did we get this number of 17% in 1 year?
I'm going to defer to Diane Wilkinson, if that's okay, Julie.
Oh, yes.
So I don't know how specific I can get, and I'm going to rely on Dr. Bossick, but I will tell you that this year we had a number of new students move into the district, and their needs exceed anything I've ever seen before. And I think you would agree with me on that. So
I know what you're hesitant to say, and I can say it.
Okay.
It's a matter of public record. The tuition that we have to pay other facilities to meet the needs of some of the children we have exceed $100,000 per child.
Okay.
So that number, when we look at that number, Lorraine will tell you, it's not even, oh wow, we must have had 12 new entrants move in. It's not that many students, and so we're obligated to provide a free and appropriate public education. So the students aren't getting the best thing that's out there, but these students are so impaired that the cost is extremely expensive.
And we're not necessarily providing those within districts.
Oh.
So when we ship folks out to other placements, because they're in our district, we put them in other facilities because we're not able to provide the minimum level of care that they
Exactly.
need. We pay outside tuition, and that's and that's sometimes why we have to make sure that our special education budget is fully funded, because we never know when those
Right.
folks are moving in.
And even though Kerry planned for something like this, you couldn't have planned for this. And I
Right.
will say,
I mean, it blew through our contingent
Right.
budget on special
Right.
ed
And
this year.
right, these students' needs could not be met
I
at
understand.
BOCES. No,
Yeah.
but I'm saying,
Yeah,
forget in district, because the principals are always willing and the staff is always willing.
Sure.
But when BOCES declines your students
Mhm.
and their needs are that excessive,
Mm.
that's what we're looking at. And what you should know is that the buildings work really hard to, we try to send out very few students because everybody
Sure.
should enjoy the experience here. And I was sharing with Dr. Bossert that in the past, if students weren't toilet trained, that was one of the things that was sort of a deal breaker for us, that maybe they require more care. Well, we have students now, in district, and we do have powers, so that we're no longer excluding these students. So the percentage of students that are going out is not that great. It's just the costs have risen so substantially, and I think you can speak that.
And one of the things Mr. Flynn, who's the CEO of West Suffolk BOCES, shared with us, BOCES tuition costs for students have raised dramatically. No surprise to anyone. The health care cost increases that we need to face at the district level are also faced by BOCES as well. And they have the same rising costs as we do. So the tuition rates jumped dramatically this year for the students who were already high expense students. So there's been a bit of a perfect storm this year. It puts us a bit behind the eight ball. I will share some good news that if you project next year and reducing our baseline and adding debt, which in a calculation for aid is helpful, we would hope to be in a much more favorable position next year. I don't want to say that definitively, but if we project things accurately, this should be a one-year hurdle to overcome, not a pattern of what I expect will continue.
I'm sorry. I think that this is a great start, and this is an introduction to the budget, some of the challenges that we're going to be facing. Obviously, the specifics of this really is what makes the difference to the public, and this is very vague. And I think that it has to be in the beginning,
Yes.
while you're looking at it. But when we're talking about class size, obviously we're not going to support or not support something until we see the numbers. When we're looking at AP selection, we need to see the class section sizes and what's, what you're eliminating and what you're not. And all of those things are the hard work that you guys are doing, and I understand that. So I think this is a great beginning. I don't think it's written in stone. I also don't think it's written in stone that the most recent things that you added to the budget should be the things that we look at with the closest lens, because some of those things we put in place for a reason, and some of the things that we have in place for a long time in the budget maybe can get looked at. And I know you understand that.
And we have been looking with far more specificity over the last number of weeks than has been presented publicly tonight. But there are some difficult messages that need to be shared. And there are some hard conversations that will take place prior to the next board meeting, so that individuals who may be impacted by the reductions that we place, we will have the opportunity to dialogue with. But it's important that the community has the same insight that the board will have, and that our faculty and staff will have, so that they can make an informed decision about our vote, and so that they can express their response to any of the adjustments made to our program.
It's different times now under the tax cap, because it's not asking the community one thing or another, as you pointed out so eloquently. People really don't tend to pierce that cap. So you have a finite amount of money, and how does it get spent, and how are we most transparent with the public in spending their money is the most important thing.
But I think the board has heard loud and clear, and I hope the community present had heard as well. We are trying to make every effort to make reductions that will have the least impact on what the program our students receive. You will hear reduce but not eliminate. You will hear maximizing efficiencies. You will hear targeted reductions, because that's what we're doing. We are going to make these reductions with a scalpel, not a chainsaw. We are not at a DEFCON 5 level where we are going to fear chaining the doors and not allowing the students to come in September. But the program that we offer has to maintain the high-quality education that the children in this community deserve. So some difficult decisions are forthcoming.
I want to ask one thing about the co-curriculars. The rate that we pay advisors for co-curriculars is contractual, correct? Now, if the PTAs were to take over that expense, or some of that expense, would they be required to offer the same amount as their contract?
Yes?
Okay.
You had brought up before about the co-curriculars that we would eliminate, like, for example, those that we don't run. The ones that we don't run, we don't pay a stipend to the teacher that's assigned to an advisor.
But it's a budgeted item.
Okay, so that can come out even. But shouldn't that be a surplus or revenue at the end of the year if we don't use it? Yeah.
It would end up in fund balance if it's not spent. But when you're starting the year in a deficit, we have to remove it from the budget, not count on the savings.
And those co-curriculars also have minimum amounts that we look at, correct?
Correct.
So we have a bottom line that if we have 2 people in,
One of the things we'll be asking our building principals and assistant principals to review is the subscription to our clubs. As diverse as we'd like to be and as many offerings as we'd like to provide, I can't entertain paying a full advisor stipend for 2 or 3 children. So we need to make sure that our clubs are fully subscribed before we run them. Same with athletic teams.
thank you.
I don't feel so good. I feel flush. I want a little less weight.
So do I.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Thank you, Mrs. Duncan. Tough year for your first presentation, but you did a great job. I appreciate all the hard work that's going into this, and I know this 45-minute presentation is hours and hours and hours of work for all of the staff and looking at, like you said, the scalpel. So I like the positivity that you're showing and not making it all gloom and doom, and we'll get through it, and we will. With the least affected student as possible and keeping within the tax cap. No other comments, right? Okay. So it looks like we are up to the second resident remarks. Board encourages all residents to attend its meeting. This section of the agenda affords them the opportunity to speak. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves and any organization they represent at the meeting. Comments related to district business or any agenda item should be kept as brief as possible, may not exceed 3 minutes. Questions or comments concerning matters which are not on the agenda will be taken under consideration and may be discontinued by the president. Public discussion of matters relating to staff, students, or others at which the reputation, privacy, or right to due process in some way is violated is prohibited. Any resident remarks? Come on, you made me read that, and now you're not going to come up and say something. No? Dr. Siddiqui?
Hi, how are you? I'm Sarah Siddiqui, community member. And thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening. I really learned a lot from these presentations, so thank you. I wanted to know if there was anything community members could do to help our district. If there's anything on our end that we could propose or maybe chip in or something like that, because it does seem a little doom and gloom, so we want to try to help out. And I think community members would be willing to kind of share the burden or maybe do some more things that we can try to improve the situation.
You go first, I'll go second.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. One of the things that we will always hope for from the community is support for the budget that is proposed. Because this budget may not make people very happy with some of the reductions we have to make, but a failed budget will require us to make further reductions. And sometimes that message doesn't become clear. So once the board has satisfied all of their questions and adopts a budget that has an enjoyment spending plan, we'll count on the community for as much support for it as possible so that we don't have to make further reductions. To further answer your question, we have some very active PTA organizations, the PTSA, the Booster Club, the Endowment, and we will count on those organizations to help us with some of the items that we were not able to include in the budget. There were some equipment and purchases of materials and supplies that really would be nice additions for our students that we just couldn't include in the budget. And when we identify what those priorities are, we will likely reach out to those community group leaderships to say, is this something you might be interested in securing?
I agree. Informing the community, so if you have a voice or a community organization, and actually educating folks that don't watch the tape, although many people do, right, Mr. Tranchino?
Dozens every year.
Unbelievable. So people that don't watch the tape, to inform them. You're sitting here in a meeting, talk to your neighbors about the budget, what it entails, how we got here, how we're trying to do the best we can for students, even touting some of our accolades that have been going on in the district for the last couple of years, which is really exciting. And these fundraising organizations that we have, like the endowment, like the Booster Club, they have fundraisers. Many times the district does go to them, and they have been tremendously generous, PTA. So getting folks to volunteer for that, contributing donations to that, really would help as well. I love that Dr. Bossart's meeting with the staff as well to get their ideas on budget savings, because we're all in it together. So the people with the boots on the ground really sometimes have the best ideas, and parents as well. So if you see, except for transportation, because we've been over that so many times, not anything but that. You know, parents do come up with ideas, so they're always welcome.
Can I add one more thing, Mrs. Freed?
You may.
I was just going to say too, like you're here in the room listening to it, I think it's important that when we have the D-word deficit on our budget and there's proposed general items that are being discussed about reducing or eliminating, just generally, you know, that is the time for the community members, the taxpayers, to get involved and voice their priorities, so that when they do have the budget, that they can completely embrace it and that they had a stake in creating it in a small way, I guess, rather than feeling blindsided at budget day. So this is the time to let people know that you need to pay attention. Yeah.
And to understand that this is the beginning of the process. So these things that are listed on this presentation are a beginning. So if folks want to be involved.
And I'll repeat, the next budget presentation update that we give to the board will be far more descriptive in what areas of our program have been targeted for reduction. We will have a much more comprehensive list. I'm hoping that I'll be able to make some adjustments to it prior to that date, based upon input that we receive from our stakeholders.
Any other questions or comments? Any other resident remarks? Staff remarks? Okay. Can I have a motion to reconvene into executive session for the purpose of reviewing information from our legal counsel? Mrs. Weiss, seconded by Mr. Tamio. All in favor? Mrs. Weiss, 5-0. Thank you all.